in London, England, made Aliyah to Israel at the age of 18, served as a staff sergeant with the elite 890 paratroopers in the IDF, served as chiefs of staff to members of the Israeli Knesset and cabinet ministers. He's a commentator on CNN, Fox News, and Newsmax. He was voted twice by the Allgemeiner as one of the 100 most influential Jews in the world. Today, he calls Israel home, where he is raising his family. In 2014, Johnny sat down with the legendary Elie Wiesel and asked, "How can I support Holocaust education?" That conversation changed his life.
He founded From the Depths, a nonprofit dedicated to preserving Holocaust memory, honoring those who saved Jewish lives, and restoring forgotten Jewish heritage across Europe. Through From the Depths, Johnny has restored hundreds of Jewish headstones torn up and used as road pavers in Poland. He has supported Righteous Among the Nations, non-Jewish heroes who sheltered Jewish families, many living forgotten in poverty. This is particularly dear to my heart because my own family, my great-grandparents and my grandparents were saved by a righteous Gentile in Poland in the winter of 1942. Of the President of Israel. Since October 7th, 2023, Johnny's voice has become even more essential in the Jewish community. He's been a trusted, clear source of news and comfort for Jews around the world. I know myself as one of the check in the morning. What has Johnny updated today? Tonight, he takes us on a deep dive behind the headlines, behind the history, and behind the heart of his remarkable work. Without further ado, we welcome Johnny Daniels.
Is this good? You can hear me? You can hear me. I'm not sure you'll understand me. That's my British accent, so I'm going to apologize in advance. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Incredibly kind of you, and Stephanie and Mark, such nice words. I should take you guys with me everywhere. Firstly, I have to thank, obviously, Nicole. Nicole is over there. Nicole, thank you so much. Nicole has been responsible for making sure that I'm here this evening through many, many messages and many phone calls. And for the last 7 months, I pretty much didn't leave Israel. I was at home with my kids. With the war with Iran and everything going on, I felt it too difficult to leave them. And I only sort of ventured out of Israel about a week and a half ago, came to the States on my first major speaking. Keeping on top of me, Nicole, thank you so much for making sure I'm here this evening. Now, we've gathered here, obviously, to have a bit of an update, but also to celebrate Bill on your birthday of multiple cakes. And I had the wonderful opportunity of sitting and arguing with Bill over lunch and discussing our different perspectives on things. But that's what's so beautiful, Bill. It's this opportunity for us to hear each other. So with a smile on our face and shake hands at the end and part ways as friends. And that's a very valuable lesson and something that more people will have in the world today. Because we're allowed to think differently. You know, we can talk a little bit about our Judaism, and in the Torah portions that we read over the last few weeks, we read a lot about the 12 tribes. You know, the Jewish people just left Egypt, and suddenly there's 12 tribes. Why on earth did we need 12 tribes? It doesn't make sense, right? There's one Jewish people, and all of a sudden we're split into 12 different groups. And each group has different feelings and different opinions and different perspectives. And you think that, you know, it'd be enough, just one of us. But no, you know, they say 2 Jews, 3 synagogues, right? Here you have 3 synagogues in Grand Rapids. And the joke is, obviously, there's the synagogue that I go to, the synagogue that I'll maybe visit, and the synagogue I'll never step foot in. And Jewish people have differing opinions. All of us have differing opinions from each other. It's what makes us so special. It's what makes us so unique. And I'm really, really happy to be able to share with you a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes. People ask me in advance of me coming to speak somewhere, what are you going to speak about? What's going on at that time? And they say, okay, well, what will that be? I said, I have no idea. And up to this morning, or up to an hour ago, I also didn't have an idea about what we'd speak about this evening, because there's a lot going on, and a lot going on every day, and a lot going on that impacts our lives on a very significant level. Now, we all know that we are on the cusp of a potential deal with Iran, a deal that could signal the end of the war with Iran, that could signal the end of Iran's nuclear capabilities, which would be a wonderful, wonderful thing. Does that happen? I don't know. Does anybody know? Nope. But what we can be sure of is that there's a direction in which it's moving. When we look at what's actually going on in Iran, and we look behind the headlines, and I think that this is the most important thing. You know, in America, your media landscape is pretty interesting. You have bastions of the truth, like the New York Times, who modeled themselves for many, many years as the direction, the leading voice of the truth in America and around the world, have shown themselves, unfortunately, to be anything but that when it comes to Israel. The horrendous article just a week and a bit ago, lie after lie, I mean, the craziest ideas pushed on Israel, things that don't even make sense, but it doesn't really matter when it comes to us. Kind of say what you want. And on the flip side, we see media outlets basically saying whatever they want, and people buying into this and believing this. And this is the tricky position in which we find ourselves. Stuck in a place where we're very much stuck in the middle, where everybody's coming at this from their own perspective and own opinion. But it seems that everybody's opinion and perspective is pretty far from the truth. So this is what's really happening. Firstly, in Israel, we're obviously at the end of a pretty tricky couple of years. October 7th came as an unbelievable shock and surprise to all of us in Israel and all Jews and good, decent, loving people around the world. A horrendous day that saw the untimely death and murder of well over 1,000 Israelis, Jews, and others by Hamas and collaborators in the south of Israel. It saw the taking of hundreds of hostages, of which, thank God, all of them are home. Even that, in itself, is a tremendous miracle. If I would have spoken here a year ago and said that I'll be standing here and telling you that every single hostage living and alive is home, it'd be difficult to even imagine. And I'll be honest with you, in Israel, in the halls of the Knesset and the heads of the security, the thought that one day we'd get all our hostages back was very difficult to believe, because this was the best playing card that Hamas had. The fact that we had hostages, unfortunately not living hostages there for many years prior to that as well, and to home is something that we need to be awfully grateful for. Truly, the fact that there are no more families waiting and wondering and praying. And even those who knew or had thought that their loved ones were killed were unable to sleep comfortably without knowing 100%. And that was also something so special for us as a Jewish people. It really showed who we were, to show that all of us were fighting. The notion that one needs to be buried properly with a Jewish burial was something that really showed the world that importance. I can tell you that initially, in conversations between Israel and the United States under President Trump and the cabinet turned around to Israel and said, okay, well, what about if just the living ones come back? We'll fight for that and push for that. The dead ones, okay, they're dead. Like, what are you going to do? It was a different perspective. And one of the things that impressed most President Trump and the entire administration was how hard the families fought bodies of their loved ones back. And the fact that they're all home is a tremendous miracle. Gaza today is strongly under Israeli control. 60% of Gaza is under the control of the Israeli Defense Forces. Israel is watching Gaza very, very carefully. You know, unfortunately, Hamas still exists and are still very strong. Still, more Hamas members are joining almost every single day. Young people are being sucked into the organization and signing up to become terrorists. And this is going to be a significant issue for Israel in the years to come. Obviously, that was put on pause as Israel then dealt with the issue of Iran alongside the United States, which in itself is also something pretty unbelievable. To see the United States fight side by side with Israel shows us, on one hand, the biggest military in the world, which is obviously the United States Army, fighting very proudly alongside the most powerful military in the world, which is the Israeli army. And watching and seeing the planes with the stars and stripes alongside the planes with the blue Star of David was a point of tremendous pride to all of us Jews around the world. And when you see militarily what Israel did inside of Iran, it's remarkable. The fact that we turned off their entire air defense capabilities, that we have complete aerial superiority over a tremendously big country. Iran is huge. You have this imagination of this place far, far away, but it's a tremendously big country. And the fact that we fly there and do whatever we want and didn't lose one soldier is a miracle, truly a miracle. And our air defense systems, the best in the world, everybody wants them. We've given them to some people already. This, again, is a sign of unbelievable ingenuity and the Jewish mind and what we're powerful and capable of. And now we're waiting to see what happens exactly with this deal with Iran. We understand that there's different constraints under different people. From a perspective of Israel, we'd much prefer that this was just done already. The initial start of the last round of the war was very hard on us in Israel. You'll have heard of the 40 days and 40 nights that we experienced under fire from Iranian missiles. That was not easy on Israel. In fact, it was very hard. On the general population, it was a really difficult month and a half. I, for example, live in an apartment in the center of Tel Aviv. I live in an older building. My apartment, I don't have a bomb shelter in my apartment, nor do I, and the safe room in the building, in the basement, isn't particularly safe. Definitely not from ballistic missiles. So when every siren went off, I had to grab my dog and my kids, and we'd run to the local mall near my house, which is the underground parking. And you can imagine, for 4 nights, it's not a very good sleep. You're sleeping in your clothes, wondering when you have to get up and run. It was incredibly stressful inside. But the strength that was shown by the population in Israel as a whole was remarkable, because everybody in Israel understood that if the price that we have to pay is an uncomfortable time overnight and not sleeping, kids out, all of these things, then it's the price that we truly willing to pay ultimately will be the position that would be in where we have a nuclear Iran on top of us. Because the fear of that is fear. And Iran truly was at the cusp of having nuclear. When President Trump decided to strike alongside Israel, for a reason, he wanted this war, wanted this war. We'd all much preferred it to happen, but it did have to happen. And the fact that it did the way that it did was a very good thing. Even now, when we look at this pause in fighting and these talks that are happening, you have to understand that at the same releasing oil is unbelievably damaging to Iran. The Iranian economy fly through that, they get stuck and explode away from forces. But if forces to the point where quite an incredible time in the history not just of Israel but of the Jewish people. Been growing at quite an incredible rate. Our stocks are through the roof. The shekel is stronger than it almost ever has been, especially comparative to the dollar. which is wonderful for those making their money in shekels and very difficult for making those in dollars. Even that has taken a knock on the Israeli economy. You know, I think half a year ago it was something like $3.3 and dropped under 3 a couple of weeks ago, which is a big, big deal. So the Israeli economy is doing very, very well. And international investors look towards Israel and understand that the future of Israel is strong, not just in economics, not just in defense, but in AI. We're leading the way in so many other tech and different fronts as well. Now, I could talk for a very, very long time about what I want to talk about. But what I like to do, especially in these scenarios, is allow all of you, wonderful audience, to ask the questions that you want to ask, to lead us in different directions, because there are many things that we could discuss. So what I'm going to do now is open up to questions. We have a microphone here that will pass around, and anybody who would like to ask, feel free. I know you're all very polite here in Grand Rapids, but please feel free. There's nothing that we can't ask, and everything is definitely on the table. So please feel free to ask away, and we will carry on from that direction. Who's going to be the brave first person with the first question? There we go.
So you spoke about how movingly the families of the hostages, that their words convinced our president that the return of the non-living hostages was important. But you never mentioned the name of the prime minister. He didn't really intervene on behalf of the hostages. He didn't act aggressively to support those families, is my understanding. So I'm just wondering, looking ahead in the next couple of months to the elections, what do you think the government is going to look like?
It's a very interesting question. Look, now we're getting political. And this is where it gets quite interesting and quite fun. There were lots of different groups there were basically two main groups of families when it came to the families of hostages. There were those in support of the government and those against the government. Those against the government were incredibly loud. Now, if you're the prime minister of a country and hostages talk about that, you put the price up. Truly, there was this notion that Netanyahu doesn't care about the hostages, that Netanyahu doesn't want them home. Completely false. Even on the most basic, simple level of, imagine him going into an election with hostages still in Gaza, how much that would have hurt him. Even just on, if you took it on the most superficial level, that all he cares about is elections, he would want those hostages home. But he's not a horrendous person, you know, especially only if you listen to CNN, you might believe that, but he's not a horrendous person. He's not a person who's heartless. He absolutely cared about it, but also dealt with it in a different way. And there was, of course, all of the missions that went on to release hostages, military missions, some of which worked, others didn't work, and some of them haven't been spoken. It's very easy to sit in opposition and say he should do more, right? You know, there was a lot of people, even with this notion of bringing them home, right, chanted towards the government. It's not like the government doesn't want to bring them home. You know, there were people at the beginning that said it shouldn't be bring them home, it should be let them go. We shouldn't be yelling at the Israelis, we should be yelling at Hamas, right? Was the government under Netanyahu the government on October 7th? Yes, they were. Do they have responsibility for that happening? Unquestionably. But were they then responsible for not doing everything to bring the hostages home? I don't think so. And there's a lot of play that we have to look at. And there are very difficult decisions that one has to make. You know, at the end of the day, if And it's much easier to talk about now in hindsight. But if we think about it from the perspective of a who doesn't have to just worry about bringing home, but also make sure that soldiers don't get killed, and also make sure that there aren't more hostages taken in the process, then the decisions are much bigger than just focusing on bringing people home. Now, if God forbid that was your son or daughter, your concern isn't everybody else. Bring my kid home. I don't care how you do it. Release every prisoner from jail in Israel. Release them all. I want my kid back. Now, you can't say anything to that parent because it's legitimate that that parent would think like that, right? But as a prime minister, you have to turn around to that parent and say, I feel your pain, but that's not going to happen, right? So it's much more complex than that. The pressure, and credit where credit's due, the hostages being released, the majority of them towards the end, was absolutely the doing of President Trump, unquestionably. Now, again, politics is a tricky thing, and, we had a nice conversation with Bill at lunch about this, but I look at this from the perspective purely as an Israeli, right? I'm not looking at this from a perspective of internal American politics. I'm not looking at it a perspective of women's rights in America and all these things that are unbelievably important. I'm looking at the perspective of Israel and President Trump. We're very lucky that he was elected. As Israelis, the majority of Israelis think that, obviously not everybody, but the majority of Israelis are very grateful to President Trump and understand that it was his pressure that brought the hostages home. And it did. Hamas were very scared of President Trump. He has a great ability to scare people, right? Because you don't quite know what he's going to do, which on one hand is pretty problematic if you live here. It could be worrisome. But in terms of the Middle East, a lot of people in Israel are saying at last there's a president who speaks Arabic, right? Someone who speaks in a tough language, right? And that tough language doesn't always go down well in a Western audience, but for the Arab world, you need to be tough. And the reason the hostages were brought home was also because of President Guinea didn't get that. And I can tell you behind the scenes what happened was fascinating. Now, you'll remember before his elections, he went to visit the Rebbe in Crown. They took him to 770 to visit the former Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was buried there. And he went there. And staffers of President Trump, Jewish staffers who I knew very well, said, look, we have to make a big deal about the hostages because he's not really getting it. Now again, he's running to be the President of the United States at the time. The fact that he doesn't know all the details about the hostages, fair enough. That's not really his prerogative. I'm sure he's not sitting there looking at my Instagram in the morning wondering what the news in Israel is, right? He's concerned with how he gets reelected. So what they did was they put up all the posters of the hostages. And when President Trump entered, for this all remember, it took him a while to come outside. And from someone who was in the room with him, he was standing there looking at all the pictures. And he said, what, that old person? Those babies? Has that all of these people have been taken captive, taken hostage by Hamas? And they said, yes, Mr. President. And it really bothered him. Then he went to speak to the Jewish community. And what they did was they left, at the time there were 240 hostages. They left at the entrance of the room, right in the front, 240 empty chairs. President Trump hates empty chairs, right? So he's standing looking from the side, and he's looking out, and he sees 240 empty chairs. And he said, what the hell's going on? Why is there all these empty seats? And they said, Mr. President, that's for the hostages. And it struck him quite how many there were. And that's how they got to him, and it really started to bother him. And then Prime Minister Netanyahu did something very, very smart. He went, and we all saw the visits of Prime Minister Netanyahu to the White House more than any other leader, more than any time in history. And it wasn't just because it was Netanyahu, it was because it was Israel. And President Trump accepted him as the first international guest. And what Prime Minister Netanyahu did was brilliant. He sat with the President Trump. President Trump is very averse to gory stuff. He doesn't like it. He's a germaphobe, that stuff. It's not for him. Prime Minister Netanyahu sat with him and shared with him classified information of the state of hostages, of the way hostages were murdered, of the way people were murdered on October 7th, showed him gory footage, and it really bothered the president. And that's what kind of switched him to this mode. And you saw him, you know, again, credit where credit's due, really push and fight to get the hostages back. And they came home because of President Trump, but it happened without Netanyahu, whether people want to admit that or not. Next question. I know the microphone's up.
So switching to Iran and the negotiations that are going on, what kind of scenario do you see where the uranium dust or the nuclear capabilities are totally gone? And I guess what my concern is when I see the negotiations going, and say, okay, we're going to open the Strait of Hormuz, and maybe some oil starts flowing out, and then, you know, with 60 days, we're going to talk about this.
So I actually think there's a whole other game going on here. I think what we're seeing is a lot of blah blah. I think effectively what we're seeing is President Trump buying time. Again, President Trump, I think, entered this war thinking it would go quicker than it did. Definitely hoping the people of Iran would rise up, hoping the Kurds would take part. They didn't do it, upset him.
It's a big deal. Like, it makes sound silly, but it's actually very big. It's a big deal. The economy is a big deal. Tourism, and it would be terrible for him to lose the Olympics. And it would be very bad for him also to have the World Cup on as well. So the 60 days buys him through that time. Then by the end of those 60 days, we're getting much closer to the midterms. For midterms, he needs the gas prices to go down. Right? I was filling up a car in New York City. I was like, this is really expensive. And I thought, hold on, I'm the last person that should be complaining about this. Right? So I paid very happily for my unbelievably high gas prices. But most Americans aren't looking at it like that. Understand? Right? They're seeing the gas prices go up. As a result of gas prices, a lot of other things will go up as well. And he needs those prices to drop right now. And it has to happen now. It will bring down the prices of oil. It will allow the markets to kind of settle, and we'll get those returns, and he won't have that looming over him. So my feeling is that this gets schlepped on until after that, and then we may see resumed action in Iran. You know, the idea that, look, I mean, even if this nuclear dust, right, effectively what you have is enriched nuclear capabilities from 60% upwards that can be relatively quickly turned into a nuclear bomb. That needs to be taken out of Iran. What's not being spoken about is the fact that they have a lot of other nuclear capability, around about 20% enrichment, which from 20% to 60% is an issue of a couple of months. So you don't really want to leave the 20% there. And Trump's not a stupid person. He's negotiated his entire life, right? And he knows very well that the Iranians are just playing a game, right? Their aim is to let this on as long as possible as well, because it's great for Iran, right? Let this carry on for as long as it needs to carry on. You know, we'll wait for President Trump to go, so we'll hope that someone else a bit more amenable comes into us next.
And we can do whatever we want. And this is something that is, honestly, this isn't, you know, again, there's this idea in America that Netanyahu has kind of bullied Trump into doing this, which is obscene, as if anybody could bully Trump into anything. Like, that guy's going to do whatever he wants, and we know that very well. I first met President Trump 15 years ago, when he was just a celebrity in New York City. I was working actually on the campaign of Prime Minister Netanyahu, and part of what I was doing was getting American celebrities to do these like fun endorsement videos. I had Chuck Norris do a video, Chuck of blessed memory, obviously. Chuck was a great guy, a big Zionist. Chuck did a video, and the other celebrity got was Donald Trump. And I sat with him quite a few times in his office in Trump Tower in New York City. And even then, the conversation was almost always about Iran. It was at the time when Ahmadinejad was the president. He was speaking at the UN, you'll remember. And he'd say to me, why are you not in Iran? Like, why are you waiting for them to hit you? Like, these are not good people. So this was 15 years ago he understood this. So I don't think his opinion or perspective has changed. I think Israel definitely showed him and convinced him that this was going to happen quicker than he imagined. And he definitely didn't want to have it to happen under his watch, which is why he did what he did. And so my feeling is that we kind of wishy-washy deal in, see it hold through midterms, and then see renewed activity. That would be my guess. But I could be wrong. Next. 1 second, I think I have a microphone over there. And then you.
I have a remark about this Hamas and the return of the hostages. So I'm from Israel, and everybody in Israel knows that Hamas never returns anybody alive. The one exception was Gilad Shalit. And for the return of Gilad Shalit, we had to give so many thousands of people, including all the leadership of Hamas that we just killed, including Sinwar himself. Another remark is that Netanyahu himself lost his brother in Entebbe to release hostages. He himself was injured in operation to release hostages in Sabena. So to say he doesn't care about hostages, I'm not buying it.
Yep.
Third, Hamas was actually saved by Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar only when Netanyahu insisted that we get into Gaza. Up to that point, there was no negotiation about everybody. They wanted to try and maybe release one by one. They didn't want to get into any kind of an agreement because they didn't fear about anything. Once they understood that their last holding there might be in risk, that's when things started to move. So that's my own thing about
you're 100% correct. Look, I think that, you know, and again, this is a very interesting point when it comes to Netanyahu, and it's been very interesting to watch the media landscape internationally turn Bibi into this kind of boogeyman, right? That, you know, you'll see Newsweek, right? Netanyahu's war, right? It's like, this isn't Netanyahu, right? This is literally everybody inside of Israel. There is no one inside of Israel that didn't want the army to do exactly what they did when it came to Hamas. No one. I mean, besides some really crazy people. I think the people who demonstrated against the war, there was like 30 crazy people. And they all ended up arrested. I don't know how, but they all ended up arrested. But these are crazy, crazy people. And when it comes to Netanyahu, again, his military experience and his experience with his brother, in fact, makes him more averse to war and sensitive than people imagine, to the point where I'm unbelievably interested to see what happens after the next elections. If he doesn't win the next elections, and there is a new government under Bennett and Eisenkot, the people that are going to have the biggest shock are going to be American Jews, because they spent such a long time looking at Netanyahu as if he's the problem, he's the warmonger, he's the person. A lot of people here, when they see this supposed left-wing government come in and do exactly the same, if not harder, it's going to be a very difficult pill to swallow. Because so much, you see, there was I can't remember who it was, some Democrat congresswoman last week or 2 weeks ago said, you know, I'm a Zionist, but I don't support Netanyahu's actions. Again, it's such nonsense, because it's not Netanyahu's actions, it's the actions of the Israeli army, which truly is the will of the Israeli people. And people need to understand this, and this is one of the biggest issues that we're going to face in the years to come between diaspora Jewry and Jews in Israel is a bigger divide, because the people of Israel, inside of Israel, there is not one major political party in Israel on the left anymore, right? Bennett is definitely not on the left. Eisenkot is not on the left, right? Even Lapid, when it comes to these things, is not left. When it comes to militarily, other things, yes, there's a lot to argue about, but all of Israel shifted to the right. No one in Israel is talking about a two-state solution. No one in Israel is talking about giving up land. Everyone in Israel understands the unbelievably crucial value of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. None of the West Bank is being given away. People talk about giving it back. You can't give back something that belongs to you. No one's giving it away. And this is something that also Israel has to also do a better job at explaining. And this is a point where Israel does need to do better in attempting to explain itself to a broader audience. Next question.
No matter what happens during these supposed peace negotiations, it seems like Hamas still keeps doing its thing. Is there any kind of master plan to stop this, to get rid of this for once and for all?
The difficulty with Hamas is that you can't change, and the only way you're ever going to change it is to change the fundamental educational system of Hamas. And that's not really going to happen if we're being honest, right? People talk, a group of doctors, psychiatrists in America said, well, why can't we re-educate the people? And, I say it's kind of like court-mandated therapy, right? People who have court-mandated therapy they sit there and say, oh, yeah, I'll never do that again, right? I'm so sorry. They just want the tick signs. I mean, you have to understand the hatred of Hamas towards the Jews is unfortunately in every single part of their being. And it's not a nice thing to say. And it's a very difficult thing to attempt to explain to a Western audience. You're in America, it's this land of Disney, right? This is a land of kumbaya and a happy ending. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. If only there was a partner that we could sit with and speak to. If only there was a way. And they're trying. There are people from Fatah, right, from the Palestinian Authority that are being spoken to with the head of Shabak, our internal secret, our FBI, went and met with a former leader of the Palestinian Authority to discuss maybe taking over Gaza and attempting to push out Hamas. But that's going to be a very, very difficult thing to do. For the foreseeable future, regardless of whether it's Netanyahu or anybody else, Israel will remain in control of most of Gaza. The Israeli army will not move from there. In terms of a long-term viable plan and a master plan, there isn't one. If only. The thought was that more countries would be, and Trump spoke about this at the beginning, was about letting the people of Gaza go. Because a lot of them don't want to be there. The problem is no one wants them. None of the Arab countries want them, right? Their Arab brethren, could have opened the borders to Egypt and let them in. They are petrified of them because it's a lawless, fundamental group. You bring them into any society, they're going to wreak havoc. And it's a very difficult thing to deal with. So, again, maybe after Iran is dealt with, we'll come back to deal with the issue of Gaza and allowing them to leave if they want to. There was no forced transfer of people. It's allowing people to leave. But Gaza's a hellhole at the moment. It's a very difficult place. Understand that there's over 1,000 kilometers of tunnels underground in Gaza. And these tunnel systems, that's bigger than the New York City subway system, right? So you've been on the ABC 123 trains in New York City, those horrible trains with rats running around, right? Imagine that subway system underground in Gaza. And you can imagine this tunnel system, these aren't like crawling tunnels. The tunnels that went from Rafah, you remember Rafah where Kamala Harris had read the map, right? Rafah that goes into Egypt, those tunnels could fit a double-decker bus inside of them. These are tremendous tunnels, and they have over 1,000 kilometers of tunnels underground in Gaza, and these tunnels need to be dealt with and blown up. It takes a long time and a lot of different capabilities to blow these tunnels up. The problem you then have is the rubble in Gaza is immense. Don't forget that Hamas fought us from civilian areas. So when Hamas is shooting you from a building, you have to take the building down. So Hamas has pushed Gaza to a position where it's a tremendous amount of rubble. To remove the rubble in Gaza alone is going to take an estimated 5 years. You then have a problem that you cannot build in Gaza because the ground has been compromised because of tunnels everywhere. So to stabilize the ground in Gaza alone will take another 5 to 7 years, right? And only then you can think of building in maybe 13 to 15 years' time. That's a long time. And Israel needs to figure out what they do with the people there, because you don't want this population living in tents. Imagine what that looks like for Israel for that long, right? The best thing would be to allow them to leave. Again, the problem is no one wants them. So it's a big thorn in Israel's side that we're going to have to deal with eventually.
It's a general open-ended question. So can you explain currently what the situation is in the West Bank? And I know there was talk about that Hamas would have been voted, at certain times, that the West Bank population would actually vote for Hamas if they could. And so there was no elections. I'm not sure what's going on with that. But I find it remarkable that seemingly is just contained and quiet right now. And I don't hear a lot of news regarding what is happening in that area and how the relationship is with, I know you just said Fatah and the PLO, but what's going on there, and how is what's happening with Gaza affected what's going to happen in the future with West Bank?
Right, that's a brilliant question. Look, it's a fascinating question. If Ariel Sharon, who made the tremendous mistake of the disengagement, would have given Gaza, instead of Gaza, would have given the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, the Palestinians to create a state, October 7th wouldn't have seen 1,400 Jews murdered, it would have seen 14,000. The West Bank is literally it's beside us, right? From Tel Aviv, you're 20-minute drive there. From Ra'anana, where probably a lot of you have family, it's even closer. And the West Bank is the day after of October 7th, Israel really got even tougher in terms of how they dealt with uprisings of Palestinians inside of the West Bank. The population, the Palestinian population in the West Bank is under very strong control of the Israeli army and Israeli police, and it has to be. And it's not the nicest thing in the world to talk about, right? Again, it doesn't sound nice, but unfortunately, we're in a region where the strongest person wins, and the strongest person is respected. And even the day after October 7th, there was a pizza shop that was opened called October 7th in the West Bank. And the same day it was opened, the Israeli army went in there with bulldozers and took the whole building down, right? You're not doing that. That sent a very clear message, and that continues to send a very clear message. The radicalization of the population in the West Bank is extreme, unfortunately. The mosques there are doing a very good job. And we know, exactly as you said, that after October 7th showed that the population, the Arab population in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, if given the opportunity, would overwhelmingly vote for Hamas. Over 80% who were polled said they'd vote for Hamas, which would be awful. So Israel works alongside the Palestinian Authority, who have police force there, who receive guns from Israel, ammunition from Israel, to basically keep control. So there remains some kind of status quo. The only reason there's not more terrorist attacks inside of Israel is because of the very big security wall that we built, right? Most of you would have seen the wall if you'd visited Israel between Arab areas and Jewish areas. That doesn't allow them to come in. 20 years ago, with the Intifada, those attacks were all coming from those areas. It's not that they've started loving Israel, it's that they've been given a lot of opportunity to come and try and kill us. So, it's tricky. This is also the reason, a lot of people spoke about annexing the West Bank, which is, putting it under official Israeli control. That also won't happen because of a population issue, because we actually don't want the control of these people, right? We're very happy leaving them in their villages and in their towns and in their cities under the control of the Palestinian Authority, but you wouldn't want them actually in proper Israel. You don't want them voting in Israeli elections. You don't want them able to have a freedom of movement. Again, it's not the nicest thing to talk about, But this is the unfortunate reality of the area in which we live. And we have to be very honest that the issues that we face are connected to a radicalization of Islam. And until we figure out how to push back against that, you're not going to end it. And I think that now more, even here in Michigan, right, when you had the synagogue that was attacked, it's the same people. It's exactly the same people. There's just unfortunately a lot more than where we are, right? And if it's not dealt with everywhere, then you'll end up with more of those here as well. So this is something that all of us need to take into account. Sure. Yep.
I had a question for you. One of the things we've dealt with a lot here in the U.S. media is the sort of complex relationship of the Christian population of Israel with not only their Muslim neighbors and the Jewish neighbors, and different sides have different opinions about that. One would think that most of the Christians would be sort of aligned or kindred souls, more wanting to live under Israeli control, or at least Jewish areas of control, given hostilities between Christians and Muslims, especially in Jerusalem. But talk about the state of, best of your knowledge, what the relationship is like with the Christian population in Israel, with the current leadership, and kind of where their sentiments lie.
So a brilliant question. Look, there's two sides to this. The first side is the fact that if we look at the general point of this, Israel is the only country in the Middle East in which there is a growing Christian population, and growing by hundreds of percent. Right, the Christian civilian population in Israel lives just like Israelis, takes part in Israeli life. I remember even when I served in the army, I had a boy with me who had a crucifix, and he was allowed to wear his necklace. And it annoyed me because they told me I have to take off this like army protocol. I was like, well, why is he allowed to wear his crucifix? And he's like, well, that's his religious symbol. I said, well, I want to wear a Magen David. And they said, and it was Israel, so I didn't get away with it. But anywhere else, I would have got away with it. But Israel is sensitive towards that. However, there is no question that there is definitely a radicalization amongst Israelis. There is. And this is also something that we have to be dealt with. It's not broad, but young Israelis are growing up angry. They really are. Again, not all of them, but a lot of them are growing up angry, and it does lead to poor behavior sometimes and a lack of understanding. And we saw some horrible things recently. A nun was pushed down in the streets of Jerusalem. She hurt her face. Other Christians have been spat on. This shouldn't happen in Israel. It really shouldn't. We are people who more than anything else, value decency and morality. And we have to model that behavior. And unfortunately, when those events do happen, I'm very proud of the fact that almost everybody calls it out immediately. But obviously, they make headlines because Jews make news, right? No Jews, no news. And if one Christian gets hurt in Jerusalem, the whole world wants to talk about it. And it was actually a Christian commentator who said something very interesting. He wrote something that I wouldn't have thought of and couldn't have said. He said, look, I live here in America, and the fact that there are some Jews who don't like Christians, I kind of get it. We haven't been the nicest to them for a very long time. There are plenty of Christians in America who don't like Jews. And the fact that there are some Jews who do silly things to Christians, okay. But to paint all of Israelis in that light is a mistake. And again, whilst it shouldn't happen, it's also wild how one stupid guy shoving a nun will literally make the front page of newspapers in America, right? Like, how many Christians are getting killed every day by Muslims in Africa, right? This is an epidemic, right? No one cares about that. Again, one Jewish guy does one thing, suddenly, so it's something that we need to watch out for in Israel. But generally, look, just walk in Jerusalem, right? You walk through the Christian quarter. They're living a great life. They're doing whatever they want. They live peacefully. They serve in the army. Sometimes they don't. They're a part of Israeli society, and people treat them decently. But and it's the same with this issue of like Jewish terror in the West Bank. There are groups of people who are behaving in a way unbefitting for us. But again, every society has its idiots, right? You know, if at the time where it's all people wanted to talk about, I said, look, you know, if you took Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein and said that that was an epidemic amongst Jews, people look at you like you're nuts. But these are two idiots who did stupid things, terrible things, and were put in jail for it. So we have idiots in Israel too, hardly surprising. Sure.
I probably can talk without a microphone.
Okay.
One has to be reminded here what happened in Plano, Texas, what happened in Richardson, Texas, what happened in Georgeson, Texas. What has happened is the Muslims tried to buy land and make it only for Muslims, banks, properties, and build their own cities. So they're no different in the United States than they are in Israel or any other place. And Americans have to realize that they're the same people. And it's the same Quran. And you have to be aware.
Look, I grew up in London, England. And you see what's happening there today, right?
Yes.
The situation in London is horrendous. It really is. I grew up in London, and you'd never imagine that you'd be fearful to go out, to walk in the streets in Jewish areas, and today you are. You know, the mass immigration into Europe has wreaked havoc on the local Jewish communities. There are countries that will soon be Jew-free. Countries like Belgium, who have just thrown 3 moihels, people who do circumcision, in jail for some stupid reason. Other countries banning kosher slaughter, making Jewish life almost impossible. And at exactly the same time, there's a tremendous fear, right? You know, the synagogues in London, you cannot, I mean, I went back, I stayed at my grandmother's last Yom Kippur. And I hadn't been to that synagogue really pretty much since my bar mitzvah. And I went there, and I was like, what is going on? Police, armed security. In England, no one has guns, right? Whatever. Not like here, where everybody has many guns. But in England, armed security, right? Checking my TARDIS bag. I couldn't believe it. But that's the state of the situation. And I remember thinking, this is a bit much. And then halfway through prayers, the rabbi stops the ceremony, stops the prayers to tell us that there'd been a terror attack in Manchester, which you'll remember happened on Yom Kippur, where 2 Jews were killed. Shocking. And this is happening in the UK. Now, and this is happening in Canada as well. Canada, honestly, unfortunately, I think is in a worse situation than the United Kingdom. People often are surprised to hear that. In the UK, you have pushback from the general population. You saw this there were recent elections in the UK. You know, the Labour Party were almost decimated. You end up with these right-wing parties coming and taking almost everything. The problem with, you know, and in the UK, you have patriots. People, you know, in America, you know, you have real patriots. You know, in the UK, you have them as well to a lesser degree. In Canada, you don't have them at all. You know, Canada's a nation of apologists. You know, oh, I'm sorry, right? You know, you're always saying sorry in Canada, right? And you start everything with a land acknowledgement. So if it's not your land, and you acknowledge that at the beginning of everything, how do you stop whoever you want coming in? And Canada really is going in a very scary direction. Synagogues shot the whole time in Toronto. There was just 2 days ago in Montreal, there was a pro-Palestine demonstration, an anti-Semitic demonstration that had an effigy of a Jew being hanged in the streets of Montreal. And the police were just watching. In fact, I was sent a video from someone. I didn't share it because it was too shocking. One of the policemen paused and went to pray with them at the side. This is Montreal. And you look at these places and you understand that they have a very big problem. And to be honest with you, the United States has a tremendous issue as well. I mean, I don't have to tell you here in Michigan, right? It's enough to look at towards Dearborn and places like that, where again, there are plenty of peaceful Muslims. There are. There are those who want to integrate. There are those who want to be members of society. The problem is the radicalization that's happening within that community is intense. And if it isn't shut down very quickly, you're going to end up like England and Canada and Europe. Belgium will soon not have any Jews there. France is becoming unbelievably dangerous. You know, I travel throughout these countries, and I'd wear a baseball cap, or I wouldn't wear a yarmulke, right? I'm not going to identify myself traveling in these countries. You know, but again, you know, and unfortunately, you look here in America, I experienced my first anti-Semitic incident in America just a week ago. There's a Mazel Tov, I think, is in order. I was in Westport, Connecticut, right? Westport, a town that was made by Jews because they weren't allowed in Stamford and Greenwich. They went and bought up all this farmland and made this uppity community in Westport, right? A third of Westport's Jewish, very Jewish town, tons of synagogues, Jewish life. I went to an Israeli restaurant in the evening with friends. Minding my own business, we exited the restaurant, and sitting opposite in a pub, some guy starts swearing at me, yelling about genocide and Israel and F this and F that. So I yelled back, right? Freedom of speech, right? And we yelled at each other for a little bit, and then I got in the car, and my partner said, you should really tell this story. And I thought, what's the big deal? Again, growing up in London, that stuff happens all the time. She was like, no, this is a big deal. So she put on the camera, turned it on me, and I just explained what had happened. I woke up the next morning. I think the video had got 150,000 views overnight. The restaurant had put out, and I didn't mention the restaurant. I didn't want to bring them into this because it wasn't their fault. The restaurant had put out a statement that they're closing for the day because of their workers feeling unsafe, and police were on the premises. I felt terrible. I was like, oh no, what have I done? So I called the restaurant, and there's an Israeli owner. He said, no, this is brilliant. I said, what's brilliant about this? He says, American Jews need to understand what they're up against. And thank God, since then, the restaurant's been jam-packed with people wanting to come and support. So he's done great business. We're having a big event there in a few weeks' time, where the people just come and be part of this. But unfortunately, this is the state that we're in today, and times have changed and are changing. But with that, I think also things will get better as well. You know, things goes in waves. Now, I'm not pro or against to make a difference, but you know, a great example to look at is what 5-6 years ago you'll remember the whole Black Lives Matter movement. You'll remember it was everywhere. I understood even here in Grand Rapids, downtown, there was mass demonstrations and everyone was kneeling and talking, all these things. Who hears about that today? Right? They're on to the next thing, which is free Palestine. Right? Soon, they'll find something else to get angry about and go on to that as well. So the general population will move on for this. The problem that we have to be careful about are local radicalized Muslim populations that will not get over this. Europe has a much bigger problem than the United States. The United States really still has a very small population, but really has to be careful. And that also, you look at the universities and the influence of countries like Qatar, who have put billions of dollars into this, in polluting universities and polluting the minds of young people. But even that we'll get through as well. Next question.
Me.
Uh-oh.
So, other than you on Instagram, which since October 7th I've been following you, where do you recommend people get sane information that will lead them in the right direction, not emotional, like just...
I don't know is the honest answer. I don't follow anybody else. I don't follow anyone else because I don't want to be, I don't want to interfere with my way of doing it. I have a pretty peculiar way of doing that. So I wrote a book a few years ago, a book called Everything You Wanted to Ask a Jew But Was Too Scared to Ask. It came out in Eastern Europe. It was a bestseller in Poland, of all places. And when I wrote the book, I stopped reading other authors for a year beforehand. because I found that my writing was being influenced from other people. It's just a mimic thing, I don't know. So I don't know is the honest answer.
How about like news-wise? Because we've discussed a million times.
I don't know. I'm very careful with how people share news, which is the reason why I started sharing the news, because I didn't like the way other people did it. I don't think everything needs to be shared. I think there are things that just hype things up. I don't share pictures often because I think they're triggering. And, you know, one has to be careful in what they share. Just now, there's breaking news that a Russian drone struck an apartment building in Romania, right, which is very, very interesting from a geopolitical perspective. Will I share that with the 35 million people who see my content every month? Probably not, because I'm not sure that there are many people who will be that interested about a Russian drone hitting in Romania. So, you know, I'm careful. I honestly don't know. But there's a lot of, read the Jerusalem Post, I suppose. Times of Israel's okay. American media I keep one away from. Both sides. Yeah, I stick the news on in America, it drives me nuts. It's like they're filling airtime with idiots. Talking heads who just make stuff up. It's the problem.
Can you talk about what you think the future for normalization of the relationships with the surrounding Arab countries, and where you think that will play in and how it will come to be? And
yeah, so well, one of the things that's been most interesting is the issue of the Abraham Accords, right? So the Abraham Accords were started actually under President Trump in his first term, where he brought Arab countries into normalization with Israel. The truth is that behind the scenes, most of these countries have great relations with Israel as it is. Most Arab countries have sturdy and strong relationships with Israel. Obviously, there are those who don't like Iran. But for example, Saudi Arabia, which is the big one, has very strong relationships on a security level and on a political level with Israel. What they don't have is obviously huge trade and public announcements as such. There are countries who led the way with that, like the United Arab Emirates, who were able to do so because they had absolute control of their population. Countries that do not have full control of their population are unable to do that because of a radicalized population. So a perfect example would be a country like Jordan, right? So on a government-to-government level, on a security level, the relationship between Israel and Jordan is unbelievable, right? When Iran was shooting missiles, the Jordanians were up in the air helping us shoot missiles down, right? But 80% of Jordan is Palestinian, right? Palestinian refugees. If they normalized with Israel, there'd be an uprising. The people would go nuts, so they don't bother. Same with Egypt. Again, the relationship with Egypt is very strong. So whilst we may see some push for normalization, President Trump tried this just yesterday, or 2 days ago. He said to these Arab countries, he said, look, I will not attack Iran, I'll make a deal with Iran, but part of that is I want Abraham Accords with Israel. And they all went, right? Not because they don't want to have relationships with us, they have relationships with us as it is, but again, it's what happens inside. MBS, the leader of Saudi Arabia, is a perfect example. This man, you've seen the pictures of him in his regalia, and this religious Muslim man. He's as religious of a Muslim as I am, right? He is not religious at all. This isn't his shtick. But he has a population who would turn on him in a heartbeat, and he is walking a tightrope. So any external public phase of affection towards Israel would wreak havoc internally. So he keeps well away from that. So again, whilst we may see normalization, it's kind of less important, the picture on the White House, and really behind the scenes when we understand that it's more than okay with these countries. Maybe we'll take another question. Your voice is definitely loud enough. Yeah.
Here's a question. I know you don't have an answer, but it's more a thought question. Where do you see Gaza in 10 years, fast forward? Who will be there and who will have control, and where will the people be, other than multiply?
Look, you know, this is one of the funniest things about this claim of genocide. We've done an awful job seeing how much how many young people there are there. You know, it's a population that is growing unbelievably fast, unbelievably fast. They're marrying each other and knocking out kids at a rate that's kind of unbelievable. In 10 years' time, my guess for how Gaza will end up in 10 years' time will look pretty similar to how it looks today. It is the lessons of October 7th have really, I mean, it struck Israel hard. No one in Israel is willing to allow that to happen again. And if Hamas stays there, which they will, because you can't destroy an ideology, then nothing will change. And we'll end up with Israel and the Israeli army mainly in control. Look, before October 7th, we completely exited Gaza and allowed them to control it themselves. And what did they do? They spent all the international aid, trillions of dollars. They could have created, you know, the Dubai of the region. They could have had a beautiful area. They put all that money underground into building thousands of kilometers worth of tunnels. And they'll do the same thing if given the chance. Just Israel would allow them to. So we'll have our army inside of there. Every time they try and do something, we take them down, and that will be it. You know, the big fight for Israel now is the issue of drones. And this is the future of warfare. The future of warfare isn't people shooting guns at each other. It's not tanks. It's all drones. Even when you look now in terms of inside of Gaza, the amount of munitions and guns being smuggled in through Sinai is immense, much bigger than you understand. The drones all day, every day. All day, every day. Going. And there's some brilliant people in Israel working on it. There's some fascinating things about to happen. I can't talk about that, but that's the future of understanding. And the second you cut off those supplies, maybe you'll be able to help turn a population, but it's going to be a long road ahead. Somaliland is an interesting thing. Somaliland is obviously a strip of land next to Somalia. The Somaliland, the people of Somaliland, I don't know what one would call them, Somalilanders, maybe, have been trying for a very long time to receive their freedom and a declaration of their independence. Effectively, no one was doing it. After October 7th proved the best time for Israel to say, you know what, why not? Right? The UN hates us anyway, everybody's against us. And Israel went ahead, and it's strategically very important for Israel. The positioning there is very, very important. The Horn of Africa gives us a chance and a viewpoint of almost everything. And the relations between Israel and Somaliland are unbelievable. Really very, very good. In fact, we're training their forces at the moment. We have soldiers inside of Somaliland, and the Israeli army have bases inside of Somaliland as well. Of the United States, almost definitely. Israel doesn't announce those things publicly. The United States probably will do something there. They don't necessarily need to. But look, it's interesting, but the way Israel acts in most of these things is that we don't announce a lot of stuff. It's kind of unnecessary, right? So even in the recent war with Iran, there were Israeli troops on ground in Iran throughout the war. We had Israeli troops on ground. Don't announce it. Unnecessary. You know, when CENTCOM stands up and Kane stands there and Hegseth and they speak about America doing this and America doing that, and, you know, sometimes they mention Israel, other times don't. Everyone, okay. It's fine. All you're good. You take the responsibility for it. We're fine. Let us do the work. We'll do what really needs to happen. And that's kind of Israel's viewpoint on a lot of this stuff. So Somaliland is crucial. There are many Israelis there already, and will be even more. I think is probably the best way to answer that question, without answering that question. Maybe we'll do one more question, then I have something to tell you. Sure. Thank you for the easy question. Look, this really is a tricky one. It's a tricky one because it's not all our fault, right? Unfortunately, we see radicalization in both parties, and a major concern about what happens next. I don't think that even a Republican Jew would look potentially at, say, J.D. Vance as an ex-president and think, oh, that would be brilliant for us, right? Be a bit like, ooh, we're not quite sure about him. And on the Democrat side, there's a lot to be worried about as well. I mean, who would have imagined, you know, even if we take Israel out of the equation for a second, who would imagine that there'd be a Democrat congressman with a swastika on his chest, right? It has nothing to do with us and everything to do with the direction of the Democrat Party. Unfortunately, the Democrat Party has been schlepped very heavily to a woke left that isn't just not good for us, it's not good for you either, right? You know, to have a Bernie Sanders figures and AOCs and all of these people is a major problem. And with that, in a sense, it doesn't matter really what we do, we're never going to get those people on site. And a lot of the donors are in that direction as well, and therefore putting a lot of pressure. There's a Democrat congressman who I spoke about before, who said, I'm a Zionist, but I don't like Netanyahu's policies, right? What does that mean, right? And this is going to be a very difficult thing. Israel, Netanyahu obviously has an affinity to Trump, and Trump has an affinity to him, and they get on well. And we had a very tough time as Israelis under the Biden administration. A very tough time. Biden helped Israel. There's no doubt that he was a Zionist and was a big supporter. But when he came at the beginning of the war and gave that famous "don't" speech, that was just as much to us as it was to the Arab world. Right? There were definitely a lack of munitions in Israel under the Biden administration, unfortunately. You'll remember under the Biden administration, there was a pushback against entering certain areas of Gaza. Kamala Harris speaking very clearly about not entering Rafah. You remember she sat there in that big interview for 60 minutes that was heavily edited and said that she'd read the maps, right? It was tricky for us under a former Democrat administration. And Israel needs to be careful in terms of how we deal with America. But even when Biden came in, for the first year, he refused to invite Netanyahu to the White House. For an entire year, all other world leaders had come and he was not inviting Bibi, and which is a problem. And you know when he invited him? After Bibi announced that he was going to China to meet with the leadership there. Same day he got an invitation from the White House. And when you look at the future of the relations between Israel and the United States, we hope that we have, look, an administration that's pro-Israel is an administration that's pro-America. A strong Israel is a strong America. A weak Israel and America turning their back on Israel is harmful for America. This is the honest truth. And this isn't just a relationship that goes one way. This isn't like America just supports Israel and, hey, we love you, right? We give America a tremendous amount. A tremendous amount. You know, when the American soldier, the Air Forceman went down inside of Iran, the Americans would not have got him back if it wasn't for us and our help. Israel helps America on so many levels that it's really difficult to even comprehend. So you hope that any administration that comes in will remain with this strong relationship with their best ally, which is us. Look at the last war with Iran. Every country turned its back. Where was the UK? Where was Europe? The French, no one expects them to do anything anyway, right? But where was everyone? Israel stood side by side. So the hope is that happens, but as Israelis, we have to be pragmatic and look at the situation. And if there was a president, either far on the right or far on the left, that didn't want these relationships with Israel, then Israel would look to China. They're not particularly anti-Semitic. They like money. We're good at that. Let's be friends with China. Israel will do what China has to. Yeah, look, I mean, again, there's there were differences in opinions, and there's differences in opinions of the Trump administration as well. But the point was is that even under Biden's administration, the relationship was still strong. And the point, Israel has to, it's very hard when the majority of Israelis are pulling to the right. And we just view these things differently. You know, if you speak to anyone in the Democrat Party, they're still chirping on about a two-state solution. No one in Israel in their right mind is talking about a two-state solution. With who? Who are you going to, look, we've tried to give a state and look what happens. So this is where the differences will continue to grow, unfortunately. And Israel has to be very, very careful. I think that you still have, you know, again, eventually when Netanyahu leaves or is voted out in the next election, it may change things slightly. Like I said, the boogeyman for the Democrats is gone, right? Bibi's out the room, so they're going to have nothing to point their finger at and have to really get to the reality of the fact that Israelis think differently, right? Israel isn't the socialist country that we were in 1948, right? Israel is not a centrist country that we were before. The Israel under Rabin, the Israel under Ariel Sharon, it's not the same country anymore. Israelis really have shifted to the right. And, you know, and we're looking at this in a very different pragmatic way. It's the same as your question about understanding about Islamists and how you deal with that. These are very uncomfortable questions to answer, and they do not go down well. Imagine trying to explain the answer to that question on an American news channel, right, about Islamists. You'd sound like a fascist. To be like, look at this racist guy talking about Muslims. It's like, you know, I don't want to have to talk about this. I'd much prefer that they didn't. But then you end up like you do in Europe. And so I think more people will wake up to it, and when people do, more people start to understand Israel, right? The people on the right in Israel who hated, the people on the right in Europe who hated Israel for years are suddenly understanding that they're having to deal with the same threat that we've been dealing with, right? So things stretch and change, but they always come back to a kind of plateau at the end, where I hopefully that ends. Sure. Mm-hmm. Right, and look, it's been a problem for a while. When you know, even if we look under Obama's policies with this Arab Spring, you know, when the Arab Spring started, there was a lot of excitement here in America. In Israel, we were saying this is an Arab winter, right? Nothing good will come out of this, and it's tricky because, look, I don't. Today, leadership of the Democrat Party is definitely pro-Israel. There's no question of that. The problem is that behind the scenes there's a tremendous amount of pressure on them not to be. And that is only growing. It's only growing from the liberal left, and it's only growing from the universities, and it's only growing from the Islamists, and a lot of funding from Islamic countries. And, you know, so yes, Israel does have to attempt to tread carefully and attempt to do more to get people on side. But when you have Gavin Newsom talk about Israel committing genocide, this isn't on us. Like, what are we meant to do in that scenario? Like, we can try our best to tell the truth, and this leads back to the problems with PR of Israel, right? Which Israel could do better with PR, but it's also very difficult to set a story that nobody wants to hear. And it's very difficult when all the talking heads are bashing Israel. They're all lying about Israel. You know, your average American who looked at the last few years of war in Gaza was incredibly confused with what was going on, right? They said, we support Israel, but, you know, you're killing a lot of children. That's all the images they got. That's all they were pumped every day across the media spectrum of America. Again, New York Times running stories about lies. So it's a very complex and difficult issue, but it will calm itself down over time. Again, more things will come up and more people will be interested in different things. Before we end, I want to tell you a story. So I know some of you see my work on social media, others haven't had the opportunity yet, or maybe don't have social media. So I, as you spoke about before, run an organization called From the Depths. From the Depths is a foundation that works in the field of Holocaust education, memory, and memorial. We have a lot of focus of our work is on Holocaust survivors and also righteous amongst the nations. My organization, I'm the only person in the world who has visited the majority of the last living righteous. I've spent a dozen years now traveling throughout Eastern Europe, mainly, all the way down to Albania, where the last living Muslim righteous died not long ago, visiting and taking care and helping and supporting the last living righteous. And as our different projects, we work often with universities and organizations throughout Eastern Europe. And we had a partnership with the University of Warsaw. And we sent students of archaeology to different areas where we'd look to uncover hidden Jewish heritage and history. As you mentioned, in pre-war Poland, there were over 1,200 Jewish cemeteries. That's a lot of Jewish cemeteries. There's actually more Jewish cemeteries than Israel and the United States combined, 1,200 Jewish cemeteries. And almost all of these cemeteries were destroyed during and after the war, where the Nazis and then later the Poles used these tombstones to rebuild their country. Warsaw Zoo, the Warsaw Airport, the Wisła, the river that runs through Warsaw, all built using Jewish tombstones. So we sent these students to these areas, and we'd look to see what was left. And we sent the students to a small town called Filipov. Filipov pre-war had 5,000 inhabitants. It was a shtetl, effectively. There were 2,500 Jews and 2,500 Poles. And they lived in relative peace and harmony because everybody was equally as poor. And in this small town of Filipov, the Nazis came and rounded up the Jews. And we went from house to house to speak to locals. And we said, maybe you know something, maybe you've heard of something, and we started to discover different things. Tombstones in people's gardens. One man said, Jews? Yeah, I have 3 in my garden. I said, pardon? He said, the family who lived here was shot. My grandparents buried them next to the pear tree in the garden. No one ever came back. They're still there. Shocking stories. And the students, in going from house to house, ended up in the home of a Polish shepherd. Now, you need to visualize this home. This wasn't a home like you have here in beautiful Grand Rapids. This was a home in a Polish village. Imagine Fiddler on the roof. Thatched roof, creaky doors. And the students knocked on this front door, and this elderly Polish man, a shepherd, invited the students into his home, happy to have guests. He invited them into his living room, and they sat down on the sofa, and they start giving him the spiel. The students from the University of Warsaw were looking for anything connected to Jewish heritage and history. And they see this elderly Polish man, this shepherd, shift in his seat. He started to get very, very nervous. Clearly, he had a story to tell. So they pushed him. They said, maybe you've heard of something. And he's sitting there quietly. Until the boss, his wife, came out from the other room and said, Yashua, tell them. And he said, look, listen. He said, I was 5 years old when the war started, and I remember the day that they came to take the Jews. I remember because I sat from that window and I watched the rabbi, this old man with this long white beard, being taken to the center of the town. He said that I saw something entirely peculiar. I saw something that I'd never seen before. This rabbi, he said, turned around and started to run. But he said it was the strangest thing. He said, watching this old man run, he said it looked like he was running in slow motion. and I was transfixed, he said. I couldn't stop looking. He said, suddenly, the rabbi looked up, and he said he looked straight at me. He said, I got such a shock that I screamed. He said, my father, realizing that I was looking through the window, pulled me away, shut the curtains, and said, don't watch, don't look. And we sat there in the house in silence. He said, maybe 5 minutes passed, maybe 10 minutes passed, and suddenly there's banging on our front door. My father, he said, was petrified. And I saw my father scared. He thought maybe the Germans had come for us. So my father went to the front door, and he said, I went with him. I stood there holding his trouser leg. I wanted to see who was there. And my father opens the door, and standing there was the rabbi. And he was crying, and he was sweating, and he was nervous. And he said he was holding something in his arms, and he pushed it onto my father. And he said, please, watch this until I return. And if I don't come back, give it to a Jew that will know what to do with it. And he said at that point, the rabbi disappeared. So the student said, well, did he ever come back? He said, no, we waited. So he said, well, what did he give you? And he said, are any of you Jewish? They said, no. So he said, well, I can't tell you then. So he said, hold on, we know a Jew. So the Jew came, and I entered the house of this Polish shepherd, and he went to open the door, and he looked at me, and he burst out crying. And he said, I've been waiting for you for 70 years. And he takes me into his living room, and he asks the students to move, and he lifts up the sofa, and lying on the floor was half of a Torah scroll. Now, seeing that on the floor was a shocking thing, right? We see a Torah in a synagogue, in the Aron, in the Ark. See it lying on the floor, couldn't believe it. So I picked up this Torah. I'm sitting there, he's crying, I'm crying, and I'm thanking him. And then I realized that there's only half. I said, how come half? He said, well, we fell under hard times in communism. It's good skin. We used it. I made my wife a handbag, insoles for our shoes. Not out of malice, they didn't know any better. So I'm sitting there with half of this Torah, and I'm thinking, what do I do? According to Jewish tradition, Jewish law, a Torah that's been desecrated, one will bury in a local Jewish cemetery. Maybe one would take this Torah and put it into a museum. And then I started driving back to Warsaw, a 3.5-hour drive. And all I could think about was the rabbi of this village who had basically risked his life to try and save this Torah. The same evening, all the Jews of Filipov were taken to Treblinka and killed. But I couldn't stop thinking about this rabbi. And I thought, there must be something that we can do. And then I decided that we're going to bring this Torah back to life. The part of the Torah that had remained was in good condition. Somehow it had remained almost perfect. So what we've done over the last almost 10 years now, obviously besides COVID, is wherever I travel to, I travel with this Torah. And we have Holocaust survivors join us in rewriting this Torah letter by letter. It's a long process, takes a very long time. The journey is equally as important as the ultimate mission. Just here in Grand Rapids, I spent this morning with an incredible Holocaust survivor. I sat with him for 2 hours. Very tricky. Only at the end of the 2 hours did I actually convince him to do it. It's only the second time ever that someone had said no, they don't want to. Managed to get him in the end. But it's an incredible process. And yesterday I had an unbelievable opportunity to visit the Maya Gardens. When Nicole told me, she said, well, if you're coming, we're going to take you to the gardens. For gardens? I was like, I've seen trees. Well, I'm okay. But I'm still a bit British. So I said, okay. And I went and I was shocked at how beautiful it was. And they took me to see the memorial tree, unbelievable tree, in memory of your father, Henry. And it was a testament, and is a testament, to the strength of the Jewish community. That even in a small place like Grand Rapids, with a small but very mighty Jewish community, you're making sure that their memory is not forgotten. And we're doing something that is a little bit different, but quite special, as we have the Torah here, just there behind me. We're going to bring the Torah down and we're going to ask you to come and sit next to me and absolutely sign a letter in memory of your father and your parents. So I'd like to invite you to please join me up here. And with that, we're going to end. So I'll just show you, actually, it's pretty amazing. So this is the Survivor Torah. All of you are welcome to come up here and see. The cover for the Torah was actually designed by a survivor called Martin Gilbert. One second, let me take it off. So I think you can see this over here. So Martin Greenfield was the tailor of Auschwitz. He survived Auschwitz as a tailor, and he came to the United States. And after his liberation, he met Eisenhower. And Eisenhower said, "Come to America, and I'll give you a job making my suits." And he was so good, he ended up making suits for every single president of the United States. I think Obama had 7, Trump had 5, and this was made for us by them. And this over here is the Survivor Torah. On the right-hand side, you can see the old part of the Torah. Come and sit next to me here on the right side. You can see the old part of the Torah. This is estimated to be about 250 years old. So survived all that time. Please have a seat. You're all very polite. Please, everybody stand up, join me up here, have an opportunity to see this. So as I said, on the right-hand side, you can see this is the old part of the Torah. You can see it's slightly different colored. That's also because of the way of cleaning parchment that would have happened back all those years ago. And you can see that each of these letters has been filled in together with me by a Holocaust survivor. And the reason we did it like this is because I'm not really smart enough to write them myself. So I had a scribe outline the letters, so effectively we fill in the letter together. So I presume that we're going to think...
I didn't know what we were doing.
No.
No.
Well, it's...
That's all right, it's okay, but
yeah.
it's beautiful, but it's kind of emotional too. It's very, I've been to Poland, I've been to my dad's hometown, and some of the journey.
Yeah.
Can you point out where you're going to mark?
Absolutely. One of the things that's interesting is when I started this project, I thought that it would be a nice thing for survivors to do. What I didn't understand was how significant it would be for them as well. They say, Rabbi, I'm right, there are 613 commandments. Do you know what the last commandment is? It's to write a Torah. And for a lot of these survivors that we're meeting with them in the last months, years, whatever it may be. So to give them this opportunity, and together with you to give an opportunity to remember your father, who I know played such a big role in this community and in the lives of everybody here, is a very powerful and emotional thing to do. So what we're going to do is you're going to hold on to the end of this feather. This way we do it together. And we're going to fill in a hay in this Torah. Mazel tov.
Wow.
Thank you very much. It's your first time doing this?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
There we go.
For sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
It's very sweet. I want to give you a hug.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you. Of course. So I kept you all a very long time. Thank you all very much for coming this evening. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me.